Government 101, an examination of the function of government. A presentation of Publius Productions. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one discussing government on this DVD. Just to set the record, this presentation was narrated on the 27th of August 2009. I want to thank you for watching this, as I know that you have other entertainment options. But this should be a very enlightening DVD because it might be the first time that you ever looked into the function of government. It might help you know a little about me and why I wanted to make this DVD. I am a graduate of the University of Arizona, but the material I will be examining has been gleaned from over 40 years of research into politics, history, and economics since graduation. This subject was not taught to me as I went through high school and college, and now I wonder why that was. And I think I have an answer, and that is why I felt that I had to produce this DVD for the sake of others who have not been taught about the functions and purposes of government. I started reading material on government back in 1962 after I graduated from college and joined the Young Republicans. And as I read, I learned a great deal about political systems and about the purpose of government. One of the first books I read was entitled The Law, written in 1850 by Frederick Bastiat, a French economist, statesman, and author. It was really eye-opening and made me question much of what I had learned, or better yet, what I had not learned at the University of Arizona before I graduated. This book is easily the best book that I have ever read on the reasons men create governments. After I read it, I started asking political candidates one simple question whenever one of them asked me for my vote. I would explain that I would ask them this one question, and by their answer I could tell if I could trust them with the power of government. And if they did not know the answer, I would say that I simply could not trust them and that they would not get my vote. Every candidate I talked to asked me to ask them the question, and that question was, what is the function of government? And I am here to tell you that of the 30 to 40 candidates I've asked this question of, only one, a state senator from Arizona, correctly identified the function of government. So today, I'm going to answer that question here during this DVD. What is the function of government? And I think it needs to be explained that I will be speaking very simply as I explain what a proper answer should be. Because I believe that it is very important that we all learn just what the function is so that we can all cast intelligent votes every time there is an election. Now let me start by examining man and his relationship to government. As we will read in a few moments, our founding fathers felt there were what they called self-evident truths. Things that were true and were not debatable. In other words, they were simply true because they were simply true. And one of those self-evident truths was this one: each man has rights. And please understand that I'm using the generic term man to include both men and women. All of humanity, both male and female, have rights. Now the next question is, what is the source of those rights? And there are only two: God or government. Thomas Jefferson, one of this nation's founding fathers, and later the third president of the United States, wrote this: "The God who gave us life gave us liberty." Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed the conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? And that thought contains a key distinction, and I would like to define two words, freedom and liberty. Freedom is the right to act morally without asking for permission, as long as it does not hinder or endanger the rights of others. You have no doubt heard that your right to swing your arm ends with my nose. A person in a state of freedom acts responsibly so as not to harm his neighbor and is based upon what has been called the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That means if you do not want anyone to commit an act of violence against you, then you should not commit an act of violence against someone else. As you have just heard, Thomas Jefferson said that God gave us our liberty. But let me define that word. It is defined as unrestrained freedom, meaning I have the right to swing my arm even if it does hit your nose. Liberty is total freedom without any constrictions on your actions. In the animal world, this liberty is defined as license. Animals act according to instinct without any concern about whether they are acting morally. The medium animal consumes the smaller animal, and the biggest consumes the medium one. And this is called the law of the jungle. In a civilized society, man has been taught to act so as not to harm the rights of others. And he is punished if he goes beyond that restraint. Civilized men build courts and then jails as prisons to punish those who harm others. I'm laughing because I painted this picture of a jail for reasons you will learn in a few minutes. Not too bad for a student of an art school for 12 years. Now let's examine what Thomas Jefferson said to see if he really meant what he said. He wrote that God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. Let's see if this is what he really meant. The God who gave us life gave us unrestrained freedom. And you would be correct if you presume that he did mean exactly that. In other words, he knew precisely what he was saying. He should have said, the God who gave us life gave us freedom, because it is a just God who teaches us to act responsibly by teaching us what is right and wrong. So we must be accurate in our choice of words. There is a major difference between liberty and freedom. Did Thomas Jefferson want to live in a society that allowed each man to decide for himself what was right and wrong? The reason that any thinking individual would not want to is obvious. No man would have the right to private property if the rest of society decided they had the right to take whatever they wanted. But Jefferson believed in a God who teaches that each man should decide for himself what was right and wrong. Therefore, he believed that this God gave man the liberty to have unrestrained freedom, meaning each man should decide for himself what was right and wrong. And I want to make it clear, Jefferson's God was not the God of the Bible, because that God taught man to be responsibly free, which means not to harm your neighbor. Thomas Jefferson was not the only person talking about liberty. This is the Statue of Unrestrained Freedom, called the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. It was built by Frederick Bartholdi, a Frenchman, and given to the United States in 1886 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Now let me return to an examination of the function of government. William Penn, the founder of the state of Pennsylvania, wrote, "If men will not be governed by God, they will be governed by tyrants." So we have a choice. We can either be governed by the moral teachings of God, or we will be governed by tyrants, those who will rule by force and deny us our unalienable rights. But perhaps the greatest short explanation of man and his government is from the Declaration of Independence, written in the year 1776. This is how they worded it. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure, meaning to protect these rights, governments are instituted among men." So here is stated the only function of government: to secure man's God-given rights. But notice, just as in the case of Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence said that we have been given the right of liberty and not freedom. And there it is in the green square off to the right side of this slide. So it wasn't just Jefferson who had misstated a self-evident truth. It was the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence itself. So Jefferson was simply expressing the thought of the day. The thought that God gave us unrestrained freedom, defined as our liberty to do whatever each of us think is right and wrong. But there is one self-evident truth in that statement, because it clearly states that there is only one function of government: to secure our rights. And that all else the government does is defined as tyranny. And tyranny is defined as total government with no concern for human rights. And governing without consent is tyranny. Now let me summarize what we have just discussed, because this is the essence of government. The question is, what is the only function of government? And the correct answer is to secure God-given rights. All else is tyranny. I would now like to discuss the definition of the two words unalienable rights. This is a close-up of the upper left-hand portion of the Declaration of Independence. The words at the top are from the opening sentence of the Declaration, which reads, "The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America." And this is the part of the Declaration that speaks about unalienable rights. The sentence reads that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now let me define the two words unalienable rights. Webster's defines the words as incapable of being surrendered, which means that we can give our rights away, but that no one can take them. We cannot be forced to surrender them. We surely recognize that men do take away the rights of others by murdering them or by stealing their property. But we acknowledge that they do not have the right to commit those acts. Therefore, with this understanding of man's rights, only the grantor can take them away. That means that if God is the source of our rights, only God can take them away. And God has chosen not to do so. So no man, no group of men, no majority, no minority, no government, no other nation has the right to take away our rights. Simply stated, no one has the right to take away our unalienable rights. Man can give them away if that is what he freely chooses, but they are his to keep, and only the grantor can take them away. But there is another position, and that is that man gives us our rights. Let me now examine that. There are those who claim that man creates government to provide us with our rights. And I would like to repeat once again that only the grantor of those rights can take them away. So if the government grants us our rights, the government can take them away. Let me illustrate that in writing. This is the International Covenant on Human Rights passed in 1966 by the unanimous consent of the members of the United Nations, which means that our representative in the United Nations voted for this document. And this is what our government agreed to. The states party to the present covenant recognize that in the enjoyment of those rights provided by the state may subject such rights only to such limitations as are determined by law. So here we see that your rights are provided by the state, and that the state may take them away as determined by law. That means your rights are not unalienable at all. They may be taken away by government as long as they pass a law giving them permission to do so. Now let me define the two words right and privilege. A right is the freedom to act morally without asking permission. A privilege is the freedom to act morally, but only after permission has been granted by some governmental agency. There are three basic rights: life, freedom, but not liberty, and property. I would now like to state a simple, evident truth. All men are created hungry. That means that we all need to eat, and that means that we need property to survive. It follows then that if you take my property from me, I will surely starve to death. Now you might recall that during the days of the Old West, a horse thief was punished for stealing a man's horse, not because it was a wrong to steal, but because a horse was vital to the man's ability to acquire the necessary sustenance for his life, and that to deprive a man of his horse deprived the man of his ability to travel in his search for his needed sustenance. But there is another way that man can take away our right to life. A thief can deprive me of my freedom, meaning the right to be free to produce that which I need to sustain my life, and if that thief succeeds, I will surely starve to death. I used to illustrate that lesson when I was teaching economics by telling my students that a tyrant could deprive them of their right to life not by murdering them, but by imprisoning them even in their classroom, so that without their freedom, my students would surely starve to death. So now let me define once again the word freedom as a condition where man is free to exercise his unalienable rights as long as he does not harm others. So just as a review, freedom means living with a moral responsibility to not harm the rights of others. The opposite of freedom is liberty, and that is defined once again as excessive, undisciplined freedom, no restraints on action. Under a condition of total liberty, there are no rights. Man will live by permission of the strongest bully. Man has decided that there are certain acts which harm others and that those acts are wrong. So how does man decide what is right and wrong? Is there a guide for man to follow? And the answer for many centuries has been the Holy Bible. I did a search on a Bible program and discovered that the word evil is used 592 times and the word good is used 778 times. So the Bible is not only a book about God and His plan for earth, it is a basic primer on good and evil. And civilized man has used it as his instruction guide on how to set up a government. Did you know that each of the 50 state constitutions in the United States refers to God? For instance, let me read just two examples of the 50. The preamble to California's Constitution reads, "We, the people of the state of California, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom." The preamble of the Constitution of Georgia reads, "We, the people of Georgia, relying upon guidance of Almighty God, do ordain this Constitution." So man utilizes a moral code, a set of ethics, in regulating his conduct. The word ethics is defined as the science of moral duty or ideal human character. What this teaches us is that each of us has rights, but that we must act responsibly so that we do not injure the rights of others. This little visual might help you understand this principle. You have the right to go from left to right, and I have the right to go from the bottom to the top. And if we both get to the red square at the same time and decide to both go, there will be a collision. So a reasonable and prudent man decides to install a stoplight to regulate who goes first and who waits for a few seconds. This is a reasonable position, although one party has to give up his freedom to move without hindrance for a short time. The thinking is that by giving up one's rights to travel without hindrance for a few short seconds, both parties will be better off than if they both moved at the same time. So the concept is some concessions about rights have to be made so that all parties can have a better chance of exercising their individual rights. Now the most important right to life, the most important right to life is the right to self-defense. Each man has the right to protect his right to life, and all men have this right equally. So all men have the right to join together to hire a bodyguard called government to protect their individual rights to life. Each man also has the right to protect his property, because without property, the man will have no right to his life. His right to survive will be taken by the bully, and he will starve to death. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, wrote, "That is not a just government where property is violated by seizures of one class of citizens for the service of the rest." The Virginia Bill of Rights, written in May of 1776, before our Declaration of Independence, declared that all men are equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, with the means of acquiring and possessing property. So man has the unalienable right to life, freedom, but not liberty and property. But as I said, there are those who disagree. There are people in the world who want to abolish your right to private property, and they are called communists. This is Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. He wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, and in it he wrote, "The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property." Marx detailed how he would use government to abolish private property. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Government would take from some to give to others, and this is the essence of communism. In America today, the communists are called liberals, because liberals do not say it, but they work to abolish private property. This is my favorite photograph of President Lyndon Johnson. I actually found it in an article in Life magazine. President Johnson would certainly qualify as a liberal, and as proof, let me offer this quote from a speech he delivered that was entered into the Congressional Record on January the 15th, 1964. "We are going to try to take all of the money that we think is unnecessarily being spent and take it from the haves and give it to the have-nots who need it so much." Now, if you analyze those two statements of Marx and Johnson, you will find that the thought is identical. The government is going to take the property of one to give it to another by force. It was Lyndon Johnson who gave America a government program called welfare. And what is welfare but a government program to take property from one to give it to another by force? This is the upper right-hand portion of the Declaration of Independence. And this is the right-hand side of a longer sentence that I want to discuss. It reads, "Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just..." And this is the continuation of that sentence on the upper left-hand side of the same declaration. And the continuation reads, "Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." When was the last time you gave your consent to government by your vote in favor of welfare? What do you think would happen if Congress asked all of the American people to vote for welfare at the ballot box? My guess is that it would be turned down by an overwhelming majority. Yet the Declaration of Independence states that government cannot govern without the consent of the people. But welfare has been a part of American life for about 40 years, and we the people have never given our direct consent to a program that takes from one to give to another by force. This is something to think about. America just elected a new president in 2008 named Barack Obama. During his discussion that he had with Joe the plumber in October of 2008 about increasing the taxes on those who earn over $250,000 to give tax credits to those who earn less than that, candidate Obama said, "When you spread the wealth around, it is good for everybody." He failed to say that it is good for everybody except those who are forced to pay the extra taxes. So Obama was agreeing with Karl Marx, the communist, who wrote, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." The wealthy have the ability, and the poor have the need. So Obama wants to take from the rich to give to the poor by force. I've sent the President a memo that reads, "Many of the very wealthy already have a way to avoid paying income taxes called tax-free foundations. That means you won't be able to take their property even by force. However, there is something that you can do. Go on national television and explain to the American people that some of the very wealthy are avoiding their fair share of the income tax burden, and that you are urging the people to write to their congressmen to abolish tax-free foundations. Then you will have access to all of the funds of the wealthy." By the way, President Obama, just so you will know, these tax-free foundations were set up before the income tax was created. That might be a clue as to whether or not you will succeed in abolishing these foundations. Just between you and me, to be honest, President Obama, I don't think you will. It is a pity that Senator Teddy Kennedy didn't dissolve his tax-free foundation before he passed away. He could have done so as an example to others to encourage them to do so as well. He could have seen just how unfair it was for him to not pay the taxes he voted on us. He could have, but he didn't. And I wonder why. This is a little article that appeared in my local newspaper in November of 2008. It reported that someone in New York agreed with Obama, who said, quote, "When you spread the wealth around, it is good for everybody," end quote. This man obtained a list of the 400 wealthiest Americans and ran some sort of internet ring that dipped into the bank account of these wealthy Americans. The article reported that he stole more than $1 million before he was caught. He was tried, found guilty, and was sentenced to jail. Now here is the question. Here are two men doing exactly the same thing, stealing property without permission. And one goes to jail and the other one doesn't. If stealing the property of the rich is against the law and requires a jail sentence, why isn't Obama going to jail as well? This is the United States, where presidents can steal legally. While I am here, I would like to discuss the great champion of stealing from the rich to give to the poor. We have been told that Robin Hood stole from the rich to give to the poor. This is, of course, Errol Flynn in the title role of that movie by that name. I will ask the question, who were the rich people Robin Hood was stealing from? I have watched the classic Robin Hood movie starring Errol Flynn many times, and the only person that Robin stole from was the King of England and his tax collector, the Sheriff of Nottingham. Robin was not stealing from the rich. He was taking back that which had been stolen from the people by the king, who was using the power of government to confiscate their wealth in the form of excessive taxation collected by the Sheriff of Nottingham and his minions. Taking back that which has been stolen is not stealing. It is getting your property back, and each of us has the right to ask the police to return the stolen property after they arrest the thief. And Robin Hood was not stealing from the rich when he returned the property of the poor taken by government. So we now can include this convicted criminal in with the other 3 thieves. What is the difference between any of these men? They all wanted to take the property of the rich and give it to the poor. And the observer has to conclude that 3 of these men wanted to use government to steal property without permission, meaning by force. And none of the 4 felt that stealing was wrong. Now let me discuss where this idea of the rich having lots of money stored somewhere and that they do not want to share it with the poor. There are 2 good examples from the past. This is Walt Disney's cartoon character named Scrooge McDuck in his vault skiing down a huge hill of coin money. He also has a money tree from which all he has to do is pull the money off as one would do with the leaves off of a tree. His nephews are shown playing in his vault as well. And the second example is Jack Benny, a comedian who enjoyed a long run of many years from 1932 to 1965 on radio and later on television. He was depicted as being very tight with his money and that he kept large quantities of it in a vault in the basement of his home. Now both of these stories are based upon a false presumption. The wealthy do not store their money in vaults. They invest it, and when they do, they create jobs. Notice the poor do not have the money to invest in factories. Only the wealthy do. And if they kept their money in vaults, people would not get jobs. So we the people have been fed a lie by Walt Disney and Jack Benny. The rich put their money to use for the benefit of those who seek employment. So now once again, what is the function of government? To secure God-given rights. That is the only legitimate function of government, and all else is tyranny. So man creates government to protect his unalienable rights to life, freedom, and not liberty and property. He creates government to protect himself from thieves, murderers, and from the government. But there are risks in creating government. I would like to quote George Washington, this nation's first president. But before I do, I would like to show you this portrait of President Washington alongside the picture of Karl Marx that I showed you before. Do you notice anything common to both of these portraits? Please notice that each is shown doing a very strange thing with their right hands inside their coat. I will not spend time now to explain what this means, so if you would like to know, please watch my 3-hour DVD entitled America's Secret Destiny, because this sign is examined in more detail. And I want you to know that understanding what this sign means will materially assist you in understanding just what America's secret destiny is. President Washington, this nation's first president, wrote, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. And like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Washington was certainly right. Government can destroy just like fire, meaning it can be a fearful master, but it can also be a beneficial servant. I have a fire burning in my home right now, and I want that fire to burn there. It is the pilot light to my gas furnace. I protect my home from being burned to the ground by building a wall around the fire called a furnace wall to keep it within its proper environment. Fire can be a beneficial servant. I use it to heat my home. I create government to also be a beneficial servant. And I protect myself from its ability to destroy me by building a wall around it called the Constitution. The purpose of the Constitution is to keep government in check, to not allow it to get outside of its bounds and destroy the nation. There are actually people who do not want this nation to have a constitutional republic. This is why lawyers are not taught constitutional law. That is why our students are not taught what their rights are and how the Constitution protects them. The liberals in today's society want government to provide housing, recreation, medical care, and education and food. But there is already a governmental agency providing all of these services. It is called a prison. Yet the liberals are not running to become a prisoner, receiving all of these governmental benefits, because they know there are two classes of people in a prison. Those who receive the benefits, and they are called prisoners, and those who dispense the benefits called guards or wardens. And those receiving all of those benefits are not free to provide them for themselves. What they want is for all of us, including them, to become prisoners without guards. So now that we know we need to create government, the question becomes, what sort of government do we create? We shall start by defining various forms of government we cannot or should not create. Rule by no one is called anarchy, but this form of no government is not really a viable option, since we've already decided that we need government to secure our God-given unalienable rights. And in fact, anarchy is only a transitional form of government, meaning a step between one form and another. The best example I can come up with is the one used by Adolf Hitler in Germany prior to World War II. Hitler created the brown shirts, who were instructed to go out into the streets and create a condition of lawlessness in the streets called anarchy. When the people decided they had had enough, Hitler showed up and promised the Germans he would end the anarchy if they would vote him into office, or at least approve his acceptance of the Chancellor of Germany. And Hitler was appointed Chancellor in 1933, and he ended the anarchy by calling in the brown shirts that he had created. He was called a genius, a powerful leader who did as he promised. Of course, he could do as he promised. He was the one who created the anarchists. And after he was in office, he created a socialist state. He understood the plan and created anarchy as a transitional form of government. There is another form of government wherein God rules directly, and it is called a theocracy. Man cannot create a theocracy. If God does not want to create one, we cannot get him to do so. And if man wants him to create a theocracy and God does not, he will not create one. So this is not an option. when we discuss the forms of government that we can create. So let me discuss forms of government that man can create. The first one is where one man rules and his decisions are law, and that form is called a dictatorship or an absolute monarchy. But every dictatorship, every monarchy is always ruled by a clique around the ruler, and it is them that rule. I do not think there has ever been a true monarchy or dictatorship. Perhaps in a small Indian tribe where the chief rules by himself, but that is rather rare. Even Indian tribes are frequently run by a council of men. Another option is to create a government where the majority of the people rule, and this is called a democracy. But others have warned us about this form of government in the past. The 1928 United States Army Training Manual defined a democracy as a government of the masses, authority derived through mass meeting. The will of the majority shall regulate. Attitude towards property is communistic, negating property rights. Results in mobocracy, which means that often a democracy can be ruled by a mob, ruled by the passion of the moment. Democracies are often controlled by a speaker who seeks to convince the democracy that they should take some action contrary to law. This person is called a demagogue. President James Madison warned us about pure democracies with these words: in all cases where a majority are united by a common interest or passion, the rights of the minority are in danger. This is a major complaint about a pure democracy. How are minority rights protected? For example, what if the majority are cannibals? In a democracy, the majority rules. And if the majority are cannibals, all that is to be decided is which meal will you become. Madison went on, democracies have ever been found incompatible with the rights to property. Perhaps the way to illustrate this thought is to ask the question, why does this society allow the will of the majority, if they do not own property, to vote a tax on the minority that does own property? School bond issues are passed on to property owners, and those who do not own property do not have to pay the tax, so they can vote positively, while the property owners who vote against it have to pay it. This is not a just system, yet it happens all over this country. Let's define the word stealing once again as the taking of property without permission. Stealing is a crime in nearly every culture in the world. So stealing is a crime and is generally punished. But here we have a majority taking the property of the minority by the force of government. In other words, if the minority does not approve of the tax and they refuse to pay it, they go to jail. Notice that it is the injured party as the one who goes to jail, not the majority who stole the property through government. Isn't that interesting? I think it is time to start a national dialogue on this. Forcing property owners to pay a tax voted on them by non-property owners is called stealing, and it should not be tolerated by a just people. And in fact, the Declaration of Independence discussed this very issue with these words: governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Governing without the consent of the people is the very definition of tyranny, and it has been the definition for thousands of years. But those who are in favor of a pure democracy realize that as a population grows, a pure democracy becomes unmanageable. It is physically impossible to get everyone together at one time so that a decision can be made. So they devised an alternative plan to meet this objection. The majority ruled by a majority of elected officials, and this is called a representative democracy. Here the people elect representatives where a majority of them decide for the people. But notice that the representative democracy does not address the problem of how they would protect the rights of the minority. So the problem is that both the democracy and the representative democracy do not protect the rights of the minority. The rights of the minority are not protected in any form of a democracy. So the problem becomes a search for a form of government that protects minority rights. And it is possible there is a form of government that protects minority rights. It is called a republic, a government of law, where the people and the government are restricted by a constitution. The Constitution limits the powers of the government and the people. Now, I would like to provide you with a very simple illustration of the difference between a democracy and a republic, one that you have all seen in hundreds of Western movies. Yet no one has explained that this scenario is a very clear example of the difference between a democracy and a republic. This is Main Street in a typical Western town. There are only two buildings in this town, a jail shown on the left and a saloon shown on the right. This first scene in the drama shows Dustin Hoffman portraying a mild-mannered shopkeeper in the saloon quietly drinking a non-alcoholic sarsaparilla, and that's him by the table to the left. You will notice that Mr. Hoffman is wearing a white hat, meaning he is a good guy. Clint Eastwood walks into the saloon, and that is him on the right side. Notice that he's wearing a black hat, obviously meaning that he is a bad man. Clint provokes a fight with Dustin Hoffman by calling him names, and Dustin rises to protect his honor. And Clint shoots him dead. The town marshal, John Wayne, rushes into the saloon after hearing the gunshot and questions the people in the room about what happened. You will know that this is John Wayne. He not only wears a white hat, it is bigger than any white hat you will ever find in the Old West. The people there tell him that Clint Eastwood provoked a fight with Dustin Hoffman and shot him dead. So John Wayne takes Clint Eastwood to the jail and locks him up. The next scene shows a man standing up on the table to provoke the people in the saloon by demanding that they should go to the jail and lynch Clint Eastwood. You will recognize this man by the fact that he also wears a black hat, only it is different than the one worn by Clint Eastwood, but only in shape. His black hat means that he's a bad man as well. This man is called a demagogue, defined as a speaker who seeks to convince the democracy that they should take some action contrary to law. He urged the people in the saloon to take Clint Eastwood out of the jail and lynch him for what he did to Dustin Hoffman. The majority are being convinced by the demagogue to lynch the villain, and they vote by a majority to hang Clint Eastwood. This is called a democracy where the majority rules, no matter whether they are right or wrong. They are the majority, and in a democracy, they rule. The demagogue urges the democracy to march down the sidewalk to the jail and lynch Clint Eastwood. This is now called a mob, and down the sidewalk they go. Oh yes, these scenes always occur at night, so the mob needs some sort of light to see where they are going, and out of nowhere, torches appear. The movies never show us where these torches come from, they just do. Now the mob reaches the jail and they demand that John Wayne hand Clint Eastwood over to them so that they, the democracy, now called a mob, can lynch him. John Wayne comes outside and convinces the mob that he will not do that Clint has a right to a fair trial where he can question witnesses in an attempt to prove his innocence. John Wayne is the Republic protecting the rights of the minority against the majority. He persuades the democracy that they do not have the right to lynch Clint Eastwood, and that he will protect the man just like he would protect anyone in the democracy. If John Wayne is effective in his words, the mob quietly dissipates and Clint Eastwood's right to a trial is protected. He will get his day in court. Here is illustrated the difference between a democracy, meaning a mob led by a demagogue, and a republic where law protects the right of the minority against the will of the majority. Now let me read Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this Union a Republican form of government. So the government of the United States shall guarantee a John Wayne for every state. But that is not what is meant by this provision. This is a copy of the Federalist Papers written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay during the deliberation of the Founding Fathers. The Federalist Papers were issued in 1788 and consist of 85 essays outlining how this new government would operate and why this government was the best choice for the United States of America. Just as an aside, I named my publishing company Publius Press, and I added this paragraph to the bottom of my letterhead stationery. Publius was the pseudonym that Hamilton, Jay, and Madison used to write the Federalist Papers that explained the government that they were forming. They chose not to use their real names because they feared retribution from the government of King George, who was creating a tyrannical government. I have chosen the same name because I also fear the retribution of government. Because I too publish the truth about government and tyranny. James Madison had been a driving force in the formation of the new nation and was called the father of the Constitution. He discussed the difference between a democracy and republic in Federalist Paper number 10. A pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person. A republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place. James Madison just defined a republic as a representative democracy. So America was not intended to have a republic as we define it today, a government of laws restricting the powers of the majority and of the government. We were given a representative democracy and told that it was a republic. So it is clear that we were not given a republic as we define it, a government where law protects man's unalienable rights from government and the will of the majority. Let me bring to your attention a rather strange philosophy of the liberal mind in America. I find it rather ironic that the liberal mind in America is all concerned with minority rights. Yet they are strong supporters of a pure democracy that has no protection of minority rights. I find that rather strange. Let me end our discussion of the political forms of government by saying that all forms of government created by man, except the true republic, are ruled by a few, and that form of government is called an oligarchy. Those who are part of the oligarchy lie to the people to make us believe that it is the people who are governing the nation and that we are protected by a constitution when they are often the ones behind the cover government. Now, once again, may I suggest that you consider watching my DVD entitled America's Secret Destiny to learn just how our founding fathers lied to us in many other ways. And in fact, they were major conspirators involving this nation in a 6,000-year-old conspiracy. But this is not the place to discuss this. Now, we have discussed the political form of government that our founding fathers gave us. Let us now discuss the economic form they provided. Let me start by giving you freshman economics as taught to me at the University of Arizona. Everything is either a consumption good or a capital good. Consumption goods are goods used for satisfying people's needs, such as food or clothing. Capital goods are commodities utilized in the production of consumption goods. This is a consumer. And this is a consumption good. The consumer chases the consumption good until he catches it for his daily nourishment. But as time progresses, the consumer starts slowing down. And it seems as if the consumption good speeds up. So the consumer creates a capital good, in this case a blowgun, to assist him in acquiring the consumption good. And with that creation, the consumer becomes a dreaded capitalist. Capitalism is any economic system that uses capital goods in acquiring consumption goods. Every society in the world is capitalistic. Every society creates capital goods to assist them in acquiring consumption goods. That means that even a communist society is a capitalist one. Because communists create capital goods just like free enterprise societies. So the question is, if both create capital goods, what is the difference between capitalism and communism? And the answer is, the difference is in who owns the capital goods. In the free enterprise system, the people own the capital goods, and we are taught that in the communist system, the state owns them. But the fact of ownership is not the key. It is who controls the capital goods. Let me give you a simple example. A father buys a new SUV. He buys the gasoline and pays for the insurance and for the maintenance. But his 16-year-old son drives it. The father owns the car, but he does not control it. The son does. Ownership without control means nothing. Let me create a table to assist in the understanding of these economic terms. So in the top line in the free enterprise system, the people own and control the capital goods. And under communism, the state owns and controls the capital goods. But there is one more system we haven't talked about so far, and this is a compromise between those who want a true free enterprise system and those who want a communist one. And in this system, the people own the capital goods, but the state controls them. And that system is called fascism. Fascism is an economic system wherein the people own the capital goods, but the state controls them. Here in America, the people own the capital goods. But the federal and state governments tell the owner what price they have to charge for their product or service. That they cannot discriminate in the hiring of their employees, and that they must pay at least a minimum wage. They are told where they can build their store. They are told what types of signs they can put in front of their factories. And they are required to be state and federal tax collectors without pay for their services. And these are only a few of the myriad of rules and regulations the business owner must comply with. And all of this is called fascism. Now let me put this into the table. Fascism, where the people own their capital goods, but the state controls them. So we have now examined the political and economic systems in the United States, and that we have determined that the claim that America is a free enterprise republic simply is not true. America is in truth a fascist economically and an oligarchy politically. And let me remind you that this is all by design, and that I would recommend once again that you purchase a copy of my DVD entitled America's Secret Destiny. Details are provided in the catalog available from the address that follows. I would like to close with this rather amusing photograph that has made the rounds of the internet some time ago. It shows a hunter sleeping with his rifle in his lap and a deer sneaking in while he's asleep to eat his lunch. I would like to use this photograph to illustrate a point. We are the sleeping hunter. And while we are sleeping, the teachings of the oligarchy that runs this country are secretly sneaking in to eat our lunch. And my admonition to you is this: it is time to wake up. Thank you so very much, and may God bless America.